Bonus points for the
Bonus
flag.
points. All right, I think we should so keep updating the chat, and you're welcome to pop questions in there as well. We're going to officially start now. So welcome everybody. I'm Nicola Elliott Wong from the H3D Foundation, and this is our webinar series. And this is the second one of our second semester. So I'm so glad to see you all here. And just a little note on that they're sort of going to come kind of thick and fast now as we try to get through all the speakers that we want to present before the end of the year. So keep checking our socials to see what's upcoming. So today we're talking about project management, and we're very blessed to have Jessica Akester from H3D joining us. Jessica is a project manager at H3D, where she oversees both the internal and external portfolios of projects. Her role involves various operational activities that contribute to H3D's mission, and she is passionate about building drug discovery capabilities on the continent. Jessica completed her BSc and BSc honors degrees in chemistry at the University of Cape Town in 2014. She then pursued an MSc in medicinal chemistry under the supervision of Prof. Chibale. In 2017, Jessica joined the H3D team as the medicinal chemist, working on TB and malaria projects at various stages of the drug discovery pipeline. After 5 years in the lab, she transitioned into a project management role where she leverages her scientific experience and knowledge to support the success of the projects. So Jessica, thank you so much for doing this webinar for us. It's always fascinating to see how it all comes together. I know you've often spoken about the puzzle pieces coming together for a project or for an event and how satisfying that can be. So over to you, and please enjoy the session.
Great. Thank you, Nicola. And thank you, everybody, for joining today. Great to see people from all over dialing in. So thank you very much to the H3D Foundation for the invitation, and it's a pleasure to be with you all today to present on project management in drug discovery. So before I get into it, the overall introduction to drug discovery and project management in particular has many different industries, but project management, the general concept is around the application of the knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to meet project requirements. And the project manager and the role of project management that it plays is around defining the project scope, identifying the deliverables, managing the risks, as well as effective communication across teams, which is very important. Now, project management can be quite generic and is applicable in a variety of different industries. For example, construction and engineering, events planning, products and manufacturing. The IT industry is also a big use of product management. And then the topic today will be how it fits into the pharmaceutical and healthcare industry and various others. A key attribute of and tool that project managers use is called the project management triangle that's shown on this side of the screen. And this is a balance of your cost, so the budget that's associated to your project, as well as the scope of project, what are the objectives that you're trying to achieve, as well as the timeline to effectively carry out your project. And throughout the project life cycle, you are constantly balancing this triangle. And this balance enables what kind of quality of project you're going to produce. And so if, for instance, you are starting to run out of funding, it may mean that you have to reduce the scope of your project or increase the timeline that it will take to be able to produce the project to succeed and to get the appropriate quality that you need. So it's a constant balance of that as you go along during the project management cycle. So to just give a broad overview as to how projects fit into a broader portfolio and what these 3 Ps, as they call it, fit in. So generally, a project has a finite duration to achieve a specific goal, whereas projects that are repetitive are generally more of a workflow or process. And then a series of projects can fit into an overall program. And these are related projects that meet a strategic business objective. And they all have the same general strategy. And then you might have other projects within your organization that are smaller projects or perhaps organizational initiatives. And this is what we would call a portfolio. So the portfolio encompasses the organizational, operational activities, as well as the specific projects within a program. So I hope that paints a little bit of an overview of how a project might fit into the overall strategy of an organization. So now going from more general project management and seeing how this applies in the drug discovery context. So whilst the principles are universal, there's various different tools and ways that you apply the different concepts of project management to the different industries that you are involved in. In particular, in the pharmaceutical industry, this oversees from drug discovery, so very early stages, all the way to regulatory approval and clinical development, where you are doing your phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 human clinical trials. There are various different modalities in drug discovery and development. For instance, there's therapeutics where you're dealing with, you could be relating it to small molecules, biologics, or monoclonal antibodies. There's also diagnostics and vaccines, etc. And so today, for today's focus, as this is primarily what H3D focuses on, is on small molecule drug discovery. So this, we're going to be focusing on this part of the pipeline in small molecules. And so how project management supports this is that they help to ensure strategic alignment, optimize the resources, fosters collaboration amongst team members, but also manages the risks as it goes along, and provides that oversight across the different projects. And what I do want to emphasize is that I'm hoping each of you sitting on this call today can take something from this presentation, as these project management tools can be applied to, for instance, your master's project, a PhD project, any form of project that you're working on. There's various different tools that you can apply in your own context. Generally, in drug discovery projects, the project managers, either the principal investigator, or it could be a project leader that's leading the specific project. It could be the chemist on the project that's leading those efforts, or the organization could have a designated project manager that helps oversee these projects. So as we go along, I hope you can think about how maybe you might be able to apply this in your own environments as well, and take little tips into your working ways of working. So one overarching tool or guideline that project management uses is the project management cycle, which takes you from the initial initiation phase to a planning phase, and then going into execution and monitoring and evaluation to ensure that the project is staying on track, and then towards project closeout. And this cycle continues. And also, as you're going along the project and you're monitoring and evaluating, you might need to go back and reevaluate the plan that you've made, etc. So this framework is what we'll be using today to help guide the presentation, and I'll take you through the various phases of the project management cycle. So in the initiation phase, you have an initial project idea and have a project proposal. Depending on your disease area, you need to apply that to the target product profile and target candidate profile, as well as start to establish what that project team looks like, and then also looking at your Gantt chart or your timeline for the full duration of the project. So diving deeper into this, when you're doing your project proposal, it is important to be able to articulate your scientific rationale, or perhaps you have a hypothesis that you're wanting to test. So really outline that. And usually when you're doing this, it's good to have some initial results that you can show to the funders that supports this hypothesis, and then distill this into clear scientific objectives of how you're going to answer these questions and test these hypotheses. Some of the resources you may have in-house, but sometimes you may need to outsource certain parts. So it's important to identify what resources you have on hand and what are the capabilities, or what might you need to outsource, or potentially think of what partners you might need to help carry out this work. And if that's the case, if you have partners or collaborators, you also need to consider the legal agreements associated with that. In terms of project planning, it's important to detail the scope of work that you're planning to carry out. And that usually can then get distilled into an overarching Gantt chart or timeline that gives the viewer a great snapshot of the work that's going to be carried out over the course of the project. What's also very important is to estimate project budgets and the finance options, and looking at where could you possibly get this funded from, or are there particular calls that are appropriate for your project that you could apply to. And then in these early stages, you need to understand what the team structure is going to look like, who's the PI, who's the project leader, and what are the team members going to be, and really start to define those roles and responsibilities, and also think about the governance structure for decision making. And then you can engage with your funders and collaborators on this. So now that you have an overall proposal together, when you're starting to think about the disease area that you are working in drug discovery, it's important to look at your target candidate profile or your target product profile. And for some disease areas, this is quite well defined, and you can do your research and find that. For instance, in malaria, MMV has distilled out what they're looking for as to the end product that they want to give patients. And this helps to know where do you want to go, and you start with the end in mind so that you can work backwards and develop a clear project plan. And the things to think about is how might this be administered to the populations? Is it going to be orally with a tablet? Is it going to be intravenous in a hospital setting? How frequent would they need to take the medication, and for how long? Who might be the target patient population? Is it for young children? Is it for pregnant women? Or is it for the general population? It's also important to keep in mind as to the stability and storage of the places that these medications will be administered. If it's going to be in rural locations where refrigeration might be a challenge, that's something you'll need to think of and build in quite early on, that you want quite a stable molecule. Also, if there are existing therapies, you might want to consider what differentiates your project. What are you wanting to achieve? Does it need to be better, work better, have less toxic effects, or perhaps target a different population? So these are the types of things you can start thinking about when you're thinking of your disease and thinking about what the patient is going to be receiving. So now thinking about your team and your team structure within your organization, this will look a bit different, but this is a structure known as a matrix structure for interdisciplinary teams, which can be applied in very different formats. So you would have your various different disciplines that contribute to the various projects over here, and then the various projects that are listed over here. And what this helps to do is to indicate what disciplines are involved in which project, and gives a broad overview so that the scientists or the people who are working on the projects know what what they're contributing to, what are their efforts meeting the objectives of the project, and how the team can work together to achieve those objectives. So this is a view. The matrix structure is a view that helps to showcase the different resources associated with the different projects potentially within your organization. When you're in this initiation proposal phase, it's important to outline the timeline for the full duration of the project. And this can be quite detailed or given as a summary, like I've shown in this example, where you show throughout the lifespan of the project. For instance, this is an example of a 4-year project where they might have a particular chemical series that is in a phase in the drug discovery pipeline. And this indicates when they might transition to the next phase. So over here at the top, you've got your milestones, and this is critical for decision making. This is where the project manager can say to the team when they set this, are you ready to present this transition? And if not, why? And how would the timeline shift? And how does that timeline shift affect all the other project milestones? So it's really important to have this upfront, but then also continuously update this as a living document with the project teams. So I hope that's given you an overview of the initiation phase of the project management cycle. And now moving over to the planning phase, where you get the project team more involved and start to develop the project goals and timelines, as well as the stakeholder management and communication plan. So I mentioned previously that you would have an overarching timeline and you have your proposal, but that's over the full duration of the project. So what I advise my teams is that we do project goals for maybe the next year or 18 months to really drill down what activities and tasks need to be done. So this is an example of a template that can be adapted, but you have your overall project goal for the funder, and then you break it down into key scientific questions or hypotheses that you want to answer, and then distill down what are the key tasks or activities, what are the doing words or the doing activities that the team needs to carry out in order to answer this question, and then associate the timeline with this. And if you have that timeline distilled out into those small bite-sized chunks of activities, you're able to put this into a more focused project timeline. As you can see here, this is showing for about an 18-month or year period. And at the bottom, you have your key activities or experiments that need to be conducted. And then at the top, you have your milestones and decision points. And this is associated with the phase transitions or other types of decisions where it's important to outline what criteria would lead the team to believe that they have ticked the box and is able to transition the project, or perhaps not able to achieve this due to certain circumstances. So maybe the project can continue, but the timelines might shift, or perhaps it's time to stop the project because we're not able to meet this criteria, and sometimes stopping a project is more important as well. So this is a living document for the project teams that should be updated at least annually, but can be done more frequently as the project progresses. With regards to stakeholder management, as a project manager or a project leader, this is really critical, especially if you're working in collaborations and project teams where there's various different groups involved. It's important to outline those expectations up front. So one thing is to formalize what the meeting structure looks like, what is the purpose of those meetings, who should be attending them, and how frequent. You don't want everybody attending every meeting every month. but really strategically thinking what is the best way that for the teams to work effectively and communicate the right information, and that enough progress is made to be able to give the appropriate updates. We also try to standardize our agendas, so it's good to establish an agenda template for the project team. And this can be adapted to the look and feel of your organization. But what you want to try and capture is the action items so that you're able to follow up on them in future meetings and able to track them, as well as for your minutes. So to capture those discussion items and actions that come out of it. And I think what's also important is that you assign responsibilities for that, so that going into the meeting, you know, this person is going to be chairing, this is the person who's going to be taking the minutes, and these people are presenting. So everybody knows what their roles are, and that it enables for effective meetings to take place. Another aspect for stakeholder management is to set up appropriate document sharing platforms and organize them in a structural architecture that makes sense. And there's various different tools and platforms that you can use for document sharing. So it's important to establish what are we going to use. Let's get consensus across how we're going to share these documents. There's also often reporting involved with projects, either to the funder or another body that needs to review the project. And these are both financial reports and scientific reports. And depending on the project, will have different frequency. But it's important to know who contributes to these reports, who needs to receive them, and how do you distribute them? How can we work collaboratively on these reports? And this is very important in helping for monitoring and evaluation of the project as well, which we'll talk about in the next slides. Again, communication is so important, and especially if you're working across different institutions or with different stakeholders. And so there's various different mechanisms. You can use your emails, your meetings, or instant messaging for this. And then there are various tools like Microsoft Teams, Slack, etc., that you're able to use to be able to have effective communication. So on this note, there are different platforms. For example, the Google Suite has a full range of different platforms for your email, for meeting, for document sharing, for document storage. And likewise, Microsoft Office also has the similar tools where they have Microsoft Teams, they have OneDrive, they have SharePoint. So I think it's just a matter of understanding what your institution uses, or if you're working across different institutions, which one do you have in common? What is going to be most effective for the project team? And also to be able to edit documents asynchronously, or so that you're not constantly sharing different emails, but you have a central place where you can all look at documents and edit them accordingly. A tool that we use at H3D is Microsoft Teams, which has been quite effective, which is what we're using today for this webinar. So if you're not familiar, you can have various different project teams within Microsoft Teams, and within those project teams, you can have instant messaging or chats and posts that you can make. You can also store files and also collaboratively edit files on that. There's also video conferencing, and they also have various different add-ins that you can explore and think about how to incorporate into your teams. For instance, there's a planner board that's I've shown an example over here, which has various different buckets, which this kind of view is quite a common project management dashboard, where within these different buckets, you have different boards, and you can stipulate what the task needs to be done, by when it needs to be done, and then assign people to that particular task. And you're able to shift these boards across the different buckets. And there's various other tools that uses something similar like this. For example, Trello boards has a similar kind of setup. So this is a great tool when you're managing across teams and need to assign different tasks. Other communication tools include something called Slack, which is great for instant messaging and sharing other types of information. There's Google Meet and Zoom for meeting online. And then one tool that I want to emphasize is for note-taking, particularly for those who attend a lot of meetings, and you might have that old school way of using a physical notebook of writing your notes. OneNote is a Microsoft Suite tool that helps to be able to categorize and organize your notes accordingly. And so you're able to have subfolders. And for instance, you might have a particular project that you meet once a month. And every time you meet, you can add your notes here. It's completely searchable. You can add tables, you can add pictures, you can add documents. So I think this is one tool, if you walk away today, to implement into your daily work. It's fantastic. You can have to-do lists. And you don't need to be a project manager to utilize these tools. As I mentioned, Trello is also a great one for having those dashboards and boards to be able to have different buckets and move resources across them. So I hope that's given you a taste of how you plan in order to manage your stakeholders and communicate effectively and set the project up for success. And then it gets to the fun part where the project team needs to execute the project, which is always exciting and needs constant attention. And so what we utilize in order to help guide the workflow in this phase is something called a screening cascade. I'm not going to go too in depth, as we could probably have a whole session just diving into the screening cascade nuances, but I will give you a flavor of what that involves and how that can help guide team in this execution phase. And then just like your communication plan, it's also important to have a data and sample management plan involved as well. So this is an example of a screening cascade. And in drug discovery, this is really important for the scientists to think about upfront. How are they going to triage the compounds that get made? So it usually starts with design and synthesis of molecules or drugs by the chemists. And then they make their drug, and then they need to send it for the various testing. But you don't want to, the different assays and stuff are costly and also consume your materials. So you don't want to test all your compounds in every assay. So how can you triage it so that you're putting the best compounds forward into more advanced assays? So over here, we have examples of various tiers. So for instance, the first tier, you'll get your initial biology activity and maybe something called solubility to see whether the compound is actually soluble in the assays. And so if they meet the criteria, so this is a specific criteria for malaria, for example, then they are able to progress to the next tier, where they run something called cytotoxicity or looking at microsomal stability. And this will depend on the disease area you're working in, but also the stage that you're in the drug discovery pipeline. But it's important that you establish what are critical path, what is on the critical path, and what is maybe just for information purposes. So if you don't get that information in time, or if it's not looking particularly promising, that's okay. We can still progress because that's more informative to understand the overall profile of your compound. A reminder that this is a reiterative process. So the project teams should reevaluate this, and depending on the issues that get picked up, for instance, if the project goes through this in the early stages and identify that toxicity is proving to be quite a problem, then you might want to put that toxicity assay up front, so that you rule out any compounds that might be toxic, so that you're not wasting resources on other assays. So constantly working with this so that you're optimizing your workflows with the project teams. It's also important that this can capture what is outsourced versus what can be done in-house, because most of the time you might have your area of expertise, for instance, in biology, but then where are you getting the other assays done? So this is a great tool to use to be able to visually represent who is testing your compounds in what assays and where. And that's particularly important when it comes to sample and data management, especially if you're working across different sites. But even if you have all the assays in your organization, it's important to establish the workflows for sharing samples, having a sample repository. All those chemical entities that the chemist makes are part of your inventory, and these can be used down the line. So you want to be able to track those and know, ooh, I want to test this compound for something else. In 3 years' time, where do I find it? And you have the appropriate storage of these samples and also have a repository that you can access. And there are various tools that you can use, which I'll touch on, such as CDD Vault, Dotmatics, or potentially if you don't have those tools, you can also make use of Excel or Teams, etc. Just having a way of tracking the samples and data is so important. And then for data management, it's also critical that you have a storage location or a way that it is also stored securely, because intellectual property or IP is important to protect. And so that's why having these software tools that has that secure storage capabilities is useful to adopt. It's also important, I think technology has advanced, and physical lab notebooks are slowly doing away with, where we're now digitizing electronic lab notebooks. So this can capture all the information in a digital format that you can access at any time. Should somebody leave the group, you're able to still access the data. If you're wanting to publish the data down the line, you have record of it, which is really important. Also, when it comes down to patenting and protecting the IP, having that track record is very critical to be able to pull out. And then also it's important that the person that is analyzing the data understands how to analyze the data. Sometimes it's the medicinal chemist also who needs to incorporate that data into designing new molecules. And so that data needs to be accessible and also presented in a way that makes sense to others. As you go along the project, it's important to minimize lag time in running the assays, monitoring your turnaround times, and addressing any bottlenecks along the way. So these are 2 examples of software that you can use for sample and data management. For example, there is CDD Vault, which stands for the Collaborative Drug Discovery Vault. And this has various different tools that are listed here, where you can have an electronic lab notebook, you can have an inventory, you can have a visualization tool to be able to visualize the data. And likewise, there's a system called Dotmatics, which does a similar thing, where the chemist can have a notebook, the biologist can have a notebook, and when the chemists synthesize a molecule and want to send it for testing, they can send it through the system, and then the biologist can pick it up in the system, put it in their experiment on their notebook, carry out the experiment, and then upload the data. And then the chemist is able to view that data on their side through the system, and it collates all the data for that particular molecule on that software, which is really great and helps for standardizing data, but also to manage your data accordingly, that you're not having loads of spreadsheets on various different computers, etc. So it is super important to implement these into your organizations. And I do want to point out that CDD Vault has created this platform for researchers working on neglected tropical diseases in academia in Africa, where you can apply for complimentary access to this. So these tools, these softwares can be quite expensive, and CDD Vault has come on board to really meet the needs for the continent. So if you are interested, please go check this out. I've put the link over here, and we can put it in the chat as well. And they help with the training and implementation of this into your organization. So you don't have an excuse to not have implement these electronic notebooks and data management systems. So moving on to monitoring and evaluation. This is where you need to see, is the project progressing? Do we need to update the timelines? Are there any risks that we should be aware of and mitigate? And then also have formal reviews for decision-making along the way. So in monitoring and evaluation, or what's also known as M&E, the project manager or the project leader needs to constantly track those timelines according to their initial project plan, and use different dashboards or tools to be able to visualize the progress and those timelines. I'll go into more depth around risk management, where a risk is an uncertain event which may occur in the future, and if it does occur, it could impact the project. So it's important to be able to know what these are and put in mitigation strategies along the way. As I mentioned, you set up your communication plan, but this needs to be continuously monitored along the way in order to maintain those stakeholder relationships and to ensure that the meetings and the communication is actually running effectively. You don't want to just be having meetings for the sake of it, but are they actually being effective? As I mentioned earlier, there is reporting involved often, either scientific reports or funding reports, financial reports. And these are actually really helpful tools for the teams to assess the project progress. What is the status? Have we overspent on the budget, or have we underspent on the budget, which both are very important? And if you have, how do you adapt to be able to make sure that you have spent on the project appropriately? And this is a tool that you can communicate to your stakeholders, to your funders, if there are any changes to your project plan or timeline. And this is where that project management triangle that you're continuously balancing comes into play, that if you are running out of time, for instance, you may need to communicate the scope of the project might need to reduce, or that you need an extension on the project, but that's you can do it within the appropriate budget, but you'll just need to have more time to be able to produce the quality that you need. So these reporting tools, they can be quite intensive, reporting to various funding bodies or stakeholders, but they are very critical for understanding where the project is and having a record of the project progress as well. So for risk management, there is a process and a tool that one can use to manage this. So starting off with identifying what the risk is. For instance, if you are relying on a particular equipment to arrive in order to carry out the work, but there could be delays in doing that. Perhaps the vendors that do the work are in different countries, or just there's prolonged timelines. So those are the risks that you identify and analyze. How likely is it to happen? And if you have a list of different risks, which ones do you need to prioritize? Which ones are the most important to address? And then you can create action plans and strategies to prevent this or have contingency plans. For instance, if that equipment doesn't arrive, can you utilize equipment from a different institution in the meantime? And what would the impact of that have? And as you're reviewing this, as you're going along the process, monitor, is this effective? Is it still working? Are the timelines being delayed, and are there any corrective actions that need to take place? And so it's important to keep documentation of these and the mitigation efforts so that you provide confidence to the stakeholders that you're able to overcome these risks and mitigate them along the way, that you are aware of them so that you're able to adapt when that risk arises. An important part of monitoring and evaluation is governance and decision making. And so it's important, as we mentioned early on, when you're initiating the project or planning for the project, to set up the governance structure, especially if you're working across different groups, different institutions. What is that overarching decision-making body that will help the projects to stick to their timelines and keep them on course? And the idea here is that the project team would present these decision points with clear proposals for the way forward to this external scientific advisory board so that they can endorse or provide alternative suggestions. And there are different types of decisions you can make, for instance, a go decision or a no-go decision on the project. So it's really important also to stop projects in a timely fashion as well so that you can move the resources to other projects. Ideally, what you would want is a phase transition. So in that drug discovery pipeline, you want to continuously be moving in that forward direction from formal hit assessment to hit to lead to LO. So those are really great decision points to make. You may have a shift in the strategy of the project, or perhaps the timeline needs to adjust or the milestone needs to adjust. And this is where you've got to present this to those advisory boards so that they approve and understand why these adjustments need to be made, and then rationally decide on when to make that milestone adjustment as well. Useful tools in monitoring and evaluation are shown here. There are many others, but these are just a few examples. And this comes back to your initial proposal and your Gantt charts. So there's various tools like Microsoft Project or Smartsheet where you list out the various tasks that need to be carried out and the duration of them. And these tools are great at producing timelines for this. And this can get updated as you go along. So you can see how perhaps a task that is dependent on another task being completed might be affected if you were to change that timeline. And what effect does it have on the overall timeline? So this is a tool that project managers and project leaders should be using to continuously track the timelines of the project and the tasks and the milestones. And another useful tool is called Microsoft Office Timeline, which is actually an add-on to Microsoft PowerPoint. And it creates great visualizations of these timelines that you can then report on and share in different presentations and formats. There is a free version of this available that has certain limitations, but is worth exploring and seeing if you can incorporate into your workflows as well. So finally, we move into project closeout. So this is where we want to capture the learnings and identify what are the next steps so that future generations or future project teams can refer back to this should they need more information on the project. So it's important to outline the reason for the termination. Sometimes it was the hypotheses that you set out was just actually not scientifically viable. Possibly that you have multiple projects and you have to down prioritize this project so that you can shift resources to other projects. The best outcome would be that you have successfully completed the project and the funding has come to an end. And so you would like to produce the overall report for that. But also you could potentially be running out of funds, so you need to stop the project at this particular point, and you can always outline what the future work would involve. So in this, you would capture the key learnings from the project. It's important to organize all the project data so that others can access it, or down the line, should you need to access it for publication purposes or general information, you're able to pull that out. What's useful is to prepare a closeout report, and usually this is a requirement from the funders anyway. And it's useful to develop the publication strategy, because usually, well, in drug discovery, you ultimately want to identify a preclinical candidate, but there's a lot of attrition along the way. So when projects stop, you want to be able to share those learnings and build that track record through publications as well. You could also consider transferring it to perhaps an academic program. It could be a good starting point for a master's or a PhD project, or potentially use it as a starting point for a new grant proposal. And then also a big one is repurposing the final compounds. So repurposing is using the same compounds, but maybe you want to screen them or test them in other disease areas, and see whether they have potential to be useful in those areas. And then what's always nice is also to review and assess how effective were the project team in this. How could we maybe have done things a bit better? What should we implement for future? So that you as an organization can continuously grow and learn from these experiences and these projects. So in summary, I hope I have managed to outline potentially what the role of a project manager plays in the overall drug discovery project, and how to apply the various project management tools to drug discovery, or potentially certain tools that you might want to start implementing in your workflows and in whichever way or form that looks like. And then also giving you an overview of the full project management cycle, from initiation, planning, execution, monitoring and evaluation, all the way to project closeout, and how this is a continuous workflow for project teams. So with that, I thank you all for your attention, and I'll open the floor up to any questions.
Jessica, thank you so much for a fantastic presentation. I have enabled microphones. And hello, so one moment. And so if there are any questions, and now's the moment to raise your hand and to ask Jessica. Alternatively, you can pop them in the chat. And maybe just while everyone's thinking, I'm going to kick off with a question about context. So obviously, and the impact of context. So you're working in South Africa and Africa. What impact does that have compared to maybe, working in the global north or in kind of the global pharmaceutical industry? Could you speak a bit to that, Jess?
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that's very suitable for this audience as well. So I would say working in drug discovery on the continent where perhaps these systems and processes are less established, generally what we found is that it's often there are pockets of excellence for the various different disciplines that can contribute to the overall drug discovery pipeline, that are embedded within academic institutions. So it's a matter of how can we adapt these project management tools to an academic institution. For instance, you may have master's or PhD students working with you, but how can you implement drug discovery through these master's and PhD projects? So trying to look overall, how can we have these smaller projects that feed into an overall drug discovery project? So adapting it in that way, and thinking about the bigger picture, but then really honing in on your area of expertise. whether it's a biological assay or chemistry, really ensuring that you've got your bit down so that you can collaborate. I think that's what we've also found across the continent, is that we need to rely on partnerships in order to be able to do full drug discovery, and knowing that we can't do everything ourselves. And so having the appropriate systems and processes in place for effective collaboration, for sample sharing, for data management is going to be critical to be able to do drug discovery on the continent and really manage the projects effectively. So that's what I would say is perhaps a nuance in the African context. Whereas perhaps in a pharmaceutical, big pharma companies, they may have all the disciplines in one, they may have all the resources under one roof, which probably differs a bit to how we operate.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think, and what I've noticed you describing through this talk is you're talking so much about the, the tools that are available, that are freely available. But really what it comes down to is getting people to do different things and to want to do different things and to want to work together, and that's so key. It's like you've got all the ingredients of the cake, but the magic has to happen in combination with everybody together, right? Could you speak a little bit to the human element behind this thing? If you want to be a project manager, yes, you need all these tools, but what else do you need to be able to work with people?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think defining the roles and responsibilities across the project team is important, so that you're not duplicating efforts and not everyone is feeling like they have to do everything. So if you can divide and conquer, that different people can take on different aspects, that will be really great and helpful. In terms of empowering yourself with these types of tools, there are various different courses that one can take. I'm sure there's a lot of tools that are freely available, but then there's also more paid for courses that one can do, for instance, through Get Smarter. There's online courses. The Project Management Institution has various different resources that you can tap into to be able to empower yourself. But I think what's critical is shifting the mindset from academia to working in this kind of environment, is that you're working as a project team and knowing that you have a role to play in the bigger picture, and understanding what the various different people are working on and how we can work together to do that. So also, I think stepping up and saying, I might not know how to do this fully, but I'm curious and I'm interested. Can I please have a go at putting together the minutes for this, or having a go at putting together a screening cascade, and just being curious with yourself within the space and seeing what you can make of it.
Okay, last question. If I think I'll grab it if nobody else has a question. But when, for you, did you know that it was time for you to leave the lab and that you wanted to go into this more supportive role? Was there a moment, or did you always know that you would go ahead in that direction? What was that transition like for you?
Yeah, it was an interesting one. I think H3D is a fantastic place for nurturing different capabilities. I think it's a continuously growing organization. And I've always been the person that would be like, raise my hand, I'm keen to get involved in this. So even when I was a scientist, I got involved in a lot of various organizational activities that did contribute to the science. And on the science side, also got very involved in kind of general project management and having curiosity there. So I think the key moment was, I think, about 2 years in, I actually took on the role of the Grow Our Own Timber coordinator, which actually helped run these webinars as well. And that's where I've got a full taste of what it's like to do project management, whether it was running events, whether it was running webinars, all these different aspects. And that was when I was like, that's something I'm interested in. So I think that was when the penny dropped. And I think when I realized that, yes, I can be a chemist, I can be contributing to a particular project, but understanding that in this type of role in project or portfolio management is that you have a greater impact across many different projects. So you're not just focused on your one project, but you can have an impact across different projects, and also working across different teams. I think we have a great team of scientists in our organization, and I think just through my interactions with them in this role, I'm not just working with the chemists or just the biologists, is that I can work across the different disciplines within the organization, which I find really fulfilling.
Thank you. Okay, well, we are almost at time with no other questions. I think we can call it. And I just want to say thank you so much, Jessica, for giving us your time and your expertise. I'm sure it's just contributes to a holistic understanding of what we're trying to do in general in this field. So thank you so much, and wishing everyone everywhere a warm and cozy week. See you next week. Okay. Next webinar.
Thank you, Leka, Jess, Leka.
Thank you, Kelly. Awesome. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for joining.
Bye.